FutureNet world. So welcome to our Wednesday webinar presented by the TEA Western North American Division. I'm Darren Brown. I'm on the Western North American Division Board and Vice President of Attraction Development at Dynamic Entertainment. So our panelists today have joined us. We have 𝐒𝐲𝐞𝐜𝐢𝐚. She's an XR immersive strategist, tech humanist, and founder of the 𝐒𝐲𝐻𝐿aboratorium. I'm going to be reading some intros here. I want to make sure I get everything right, so please bear with me as I go. So 𝐒𝐲𝐞𝐜𝐢𝐚 is known as a tech humanist and an extended reality immersive strategist with over 25 years building both user and guest experiences in media, gaming, world building, theme parks, and location-based entertainment. She works at the cross-section of AR, VR, MR, and AI. 𝐒𝐲𝐞𝐜𝐢𝐚's consultancy, the 𝐒𝐿aboratorium, focuses on three areas: XR and AI research, XR and AI client projects, and public speaking. One of 𝐒𝐲𝐞𝐜𝐢𝐚's past talks, Meet Your Digital Twin, is about the land rush to recreating your likeness, whether it be your whole self or signature parts of you. And it's now all coming to fruition. 𝐒𝐲𝐞𝐜𝐢𝐚's background includes being a creative producer and experience designer with several corporations, such as DreamWorks Interactive, where she was one of the few females working with the Medal of Honor video game team and franchise. 𝐒𝐲𝐞𝐜𝐢𝐚 also worked for IBM Centers for Innovation, as well as Walt Disney Parks and Resorts. 𝐒𝐲𝐞𝐜𝐢𝐚 was the former Vice President of Digital Innovation and Integration for the National Constitution Center, helping to tell the contemporary story of the U.S. Constitution. And currently, 𝐒𝐲𝐞𝐜𝐢𝐚 sits on the advisory board of Holoride in Munich, a spin-out of Audio Innovation. Think passenger entertainment and motion synchronized experiences in your car. She's also the jury chair of the 𝐿 Award, an annual immersive award show hosted by Europa Park in Germany. And lastly, 𝐒𝐲𝐞𝐜𝐢𝐚 is collaborating with the city of Los Angeles, researching how we digitally twin the city in support of closing the digital divide to help every LA citizen access new platforms for spatial experiences. 𝐒𝐲𝐞𝐜𝐢𝐚's personal research focuses on Indigenous and neurodivergent communities inside immersive worlds. We also have Rachel Joy Victor. Rachel is the co-founder of FBRC.AI, a company focused on creating AI-supported tools for the future of content production. Rachel's work as a designer, strategist, and world builder for emerging technologies, XR, AI, and Web3 focuses on creating cohesive brand, narrative, and product experiences. She designs for a range of applications, from multi-platform narratives and immersive experiences to tools and platforms to spaces and cities. She draws from her education in computational neuroscience and spatial economics to facilitate the creation of data-informed emergent experience where world simulation, systems design, and cognitive architectures intersect. Rachel's clients have included Disney, HBO, Technicolor, Vans, Ford, Nike, Meow Wolf, Niantic, and many more. And last but definitely not least, Lisa J. Shanley, Director of Marketing for JRA. You might know Lisa from her work with Hypervision, where she was a Strategic Account Director of Immersive Experiences. And she's now the Director of Business Development for JRA, a part of RWS. Congratulations, Lisa. And she's also a TEA Western North American Division board member, along with myself, and she's the co-chair of our communications committee. And she's also a computer/media/tech geek, her words, not mine, and tends to be an early adopter. One last point before we get going. Feel free to post questions as we go in the chat. I'll gather those up as we move along, and then we'll circle back to them towards the end of the session. All right, here we are. So again, we're doing the third in the series. It's turned out to be a roughly annual discussion of the state of extended reality and how to connect it with the design of themed experiences and storytelling. So this time, we're really focusing on storytelling through various mediums and layers of reality. 𝐒𝐲𝐞𝐜𝐢𝐚 initiated this session with the TEA. We had some great panelists join us previously, Amy Jupiter, Dane Smith, Michael Libby, and once again, I'm lucky because our panelists know way more about this stuff than I do. So I have the luxury of just asking questions and learning with everybody out there. So we're going to start with 𝐒𝐲𝐞𝐜𝐢𝐚 and have me stop talking. So 𝐒𝐲𝐞𝐜𝐢𝐚, it's been about a year since we talked last, and that's a long time in technology terms. So can you start with a quick recap of what we've learned before and kind of what's happened over the last year and Also, we'll talk about what's the question, what does the Immersiverse mean to you? Over to you. You are on mute.
Always on mute. It's never changed. Always on mute. Anyway, thanks TEA, thanks Lisa, Rachel, Darren, thanks everybody for joining. I'm just going to jump in to show a short deck that is normally 30 minutes, and we're going to do this in 10 minutes. Hi, everybody. Hi, that's me. That's me back in the days when we were, in COVID. That was my snap lens. That's no longer. I really love that moment. I was like, damn, that looks great. Anyway, this is my journey. And Darren just spent a good amount of time sharing my journey. So this is if I were to visualize it. And the thing sort of to highlight here is coming from traditional art into digital twinning and experience design and 30 years in between. I was really a happy glassblower. I have my consultancy, the Collaboratorium. We focus on XR AI research. Like I said, I'm going to go through these fast, but mostly I'm a tech humanist, and we'll get into a little bit of what that means later. And I call myself a presentist, no longer a futurist, because we're here. We talked about the Array Awards, and a couple folks that are on here were at the Array Awards, which is super exciting. That happens every year in January, so tune into that. It's at Europa Park. Also with HoloRide, which is basically VR in your car. So check more out about that. Here we're using the HTC Vive Pro glasses, but we're really here to talk about the Immersiverse. And I coined this phrase just planning this session, which is the irony, because I think at this point, anybody can coin anything. I'm like, what hasn't been said? The Immersiverse, that hasn't been said. So I'm kind of riffing on that. So don't believe that it's any one thing. But in order to substantiate it, truly, I have spent many years in this industry, starting back from 1994, and I called it the 3 eyes era. Now we're in the 4 eyes era, which sounds terrible, but the interactive era, and give or take years here, but in these 10-year chunks, we went from the interactive era to the integrated media era to the immersive era, and now we're headed towards the intelligence era. If you were going to work during this time, you might have been a digital immigrant like myself, turned native. You could have been a digital native, which many of you may be. A digital imaginative is this Gen Alpha phase. And then we're going into Gen Beta. Like, we can't even get into Alpha. Now we're in Beta with the digital, I call it the intelligent person. But 10 years ago, this is where we started, which I'm sure many folks know, from the storytelling part of immersive. And the irony here is that if you looked at 30 years of development for VR headsets that only go to 2021, that cardboard would be on the second row, right before Oculus SDK, or between 1 and 2. And that's the second row of this. So look at all the development that has happened up until 2021. That's not even talking about from 2021 to where we are today with the Apple Vision Pro. So what's immersive? I suppose if you had to say what's immersive, you'd have to answer what's the metaverse, because now everything seems to be interchangeable. So we used to say that it's the internet that you could walk into. And if you didn't know what the metaverse was, for somebody right, fresh into this industry, you might swap it with any one of these terms. But truly today, we focus on spatial web and spatial computing as the sort of new word, not necessarily metaverse, but metaverse still lives and will always live. But there's a different place for spatial computing and spatial web versus metaverse. And we're beginning to define it and conflate it at the same time. So it doesn't make for anything easy. What I used to say is that there was 2 paths. There's the reality path. If you were going to go down architecture and digital twinning and looking at real worlds, you might go down one path. But if you were going to be in media and entertainment and gaming, like where I started in animation and then went to gaming, you'd be on the fantasy side. But the irony is now we're a complete blended reality. That's what's happening. I can't emphasize enough, this is a moment of convergence. And it makes it really difficult on the workflow, and it makes it difficult on the user experience. And just yesterday, while I was doing another demo with the Vision Pro, the idea to be able to take the digital crown and diffuse your reality or heighten your reality depending on your environment is just so in alignment with this idea that we're on one path now. So what makes up these immersive spaces? It's three things. It's worlds, it's the people in those worlds, and it's the goods and services, it's the marketplace. And some of you might have seen this because I have shown this before in bits and pieces, but it makes sense for other folks as well. But what's the architecture behind that, what we're calling now immersive space? It's the visual layer, which is XR, it's the blockchain economic layer, and it's the infrastructure as far as the AI and machine learning layer. But if you really want people to feel a certain way, then you really need to sort of pivot your focus on experience design, immersive design, interaction design, and narrative and storytelling, on top of taking insights from data. So again, those three ways in, right? Worlds, people, and the marketplace. So let's talk about worlds for a second. So way back in the day, for me, it was Warcraft. When Warcraft started, I was in awe of how much money that was generating at the time. Sims as well as Second Life, and they're all still going. But if we look at these different verticals of education and business and gaming and crypto and social and work and community DAOs, there are a lot of environments to play in. And of course, everybody's talking about interoperability. Can we take, our avatar with us? Can we take our goods and services with us? From the architecture point of view, this is the first time that we're taking SketchUp and Rhino and Revit, and we're taking national BIM standards, and we're actually bringing this all into Unity and Unreal. This is a game changer. So this is where everything was reality and fantasy is now blurring because these two worlds are blurring. So we talk about people and avatars. You can create your own avatar, and you can get on a volumetric capture stage and you can recreate your digital twin. You can mocap yourself. You can get into a hologram box, and it's as much immersive as being in an immersive world as using pin screen with a 2D image of yourself to create a 3D render, or using metahumans, obviously, let's just call it a deep fake, recreation of yourself, or soul machines that has and will continue to build a virtual gene pool of every virtual human that they build. As far as presence goes, 7 years ago, I was talking about this as far as the land rush for parts. I researched 36 different companies that were representing likeness. These are just 12 of those companies, and the different names that everybody has in on wanting to capture, everything from your voice to your laugh to your walk to your, moves. And it was just evident that, oh my gosh, someone's going to sell me for my parts. And, that moment, sadly and inspirationally, is here. On the market side, everything from Bored Apes and NFTs to virtual real estate to music in the metaverse and Fortnite to, and I'm going clockwise, to, industrialization and manufacturing of digital twins, social media influencers, inside gaming engines, as well as retail, is how we want to tell stories, right? How do we want to tell stories looking at this from a marketplace, from a goods and services point of view? You could be on the creation part, the sales part, you could be on the ownership part, you could be on the economic part of it all. So we asked, what's the metaverse? It was the internet you could walk into. So what's an immersive world? So now it's a blended reality that you can walk into. And in my life, I look at this three ways that I constantly have to solve for clients in real life, on a screen, and in a world all at the same time. It has to be actually backwards compatible in every way. And the reason why on a screen is differentiated between in world is because you have to meet people where they're at, and the majority of folks are on a screen. So what's real? That's the question. Obviously, with OpenAI and a lot of other folks' version of that, this really begins to question what's next. So yeah, we have text to page, text to speech, text to screen, text to video, all of the text twos, right? We're texting to reality. And if you listened to Jensen Huang's talk from NVIDIA this week, you can see where it's headed, which is we're speaking into our scenes, and our scenes are going to be our reality. So we're going to be choreographing our realities. So where I say we've been in a creative renaissance until 2045, and now Ray Kurzweil pulled that back to 2029, that's just 5 years away. We're in a curated renaissance, which starts basically right now. And when we talk about bringing emotion, should AI have feelings, where Musk says no, it's what stories are all about. So this is a new project I'm working on called AI-EIO, and it's the argument for emotional intelligence and why it's so important in immersive spaces. So with that, I'm going to end, and hopefully that can kick off some conversation here.
Thanks, Kathleen.
Yeah.
So yeah, we're going to continue around with a couple of minutes from each panelist, and then we'll go back into some panel discussion. So Rachel, we're going to move on to you now. So you've got experience with Fabricate AI world building, and that's a key part of immersive storytelling. So can you tell us more about that and what the Immersiverse means to you?
Yeah, so excited to be here. Thank you for organizing this, and I'm glad I get to be part of the conversation. So my background really comes from, in some ways, similar to what Kathleen's talking about, of like bringing these worlds together, really seeing how, as we live in this time where narrative and product are intersecting with each other, when we're building these experiences, we have to build with this idea of sometimes it's going to be a play-based experience, sometimes it's going to be a functional experience, and sometimes it's going to be across all of what we call like our layers of reality. And we have to think about, when we're designing in this context now, we have to think about cohesion. We have to think about, what does it mean to represent the self? What does it mean to represent others? What does it mean to represent space? All of these things become important considerations. And for that type of work, for me, world building always is kind of the through line, because we're trying to deal with all of this information, all of this context. How do we really do that? And world building, I think if you're coming from like a gaming context, means something very specific, or if you're coming from a fantasy novel perspective, means something else. When I think about world building, I really think about it in 4 layers. So the base layer is the systems logic. It's how are we thinking about systems as they relate to each other, our economic systems, cultural systems. All of these things are the base of what enables stories, but also enables other forms of interaction. So the systems logic is at the core. The systems logic helps you start to think about the spatial layout. If we're trying to feel a world that feels cohesive at an economic level and a cultural level, how does that affect the way that space looks and feels? When we start building out these spaces and these things that feel a certain way, we eventually have this transmedia universe, the story world that can sustain narrative across different formats. And in a deeper level now, kind of the area I'm focused on now with Fabric is, once you have these story worlds that you can build, they're not just, their story worlds aren't just about the lore, they aren't just about the logic of the worlds, but they're actually these real-time now 3D worlds, like Kathleen mentioned, that can now support experiences across formats. So you can spend time in those worlds as a virtual world format, or those real-time 3D worlds can be used as the background for virtual production. They can be used as the canvas for now building a game that you want to pull into a different experience, right? So world building kind of takes you from the logic level to actually making these things and bringing them to life. And when we think about worlds at a fundamental level, it does come back to stories, right? Because stories arise from worlds. If we're thinking about Star Wars, whether in the film context or in the theme park context, the reason that it resonates is the story, but also because there's such a rich world behind it. There's more that we want to discover. There's more that we want to dig into. So when we're building these worlds, when we're talking about these systems relationships, when we're thinking about the entry points that they provide, we're really moving towards a time where we're able to think about these worlds as not just, the static thing, but this evolving thing that people can interact with. And if that's the case, then the way that we think about experience needs to evolve for this new context. For me, this means that everything comes back to data at some level or the other. The world is data, everything in the world, whether if we're talking about a virtual world that has trees, the trees are data that have different types of data points. The people in the world are data. So again, we're dealing with this context where there's so much information thrown at us. We have information about the world, information about the players or the users in the world is also all data. We have data about what they're taking in about the world. We have data about how they're acting in the world. And out of all of that, we want some cohesion, right? We want something that hopefully represents and responds to each individual within that world in a unique way and lets them feel like they're having something that feels more than the sum of its parts. So that's kind of where AI comes into this conversation, right? We have all this data about the world, we have this data about individuals. AI helps us organize that data, helps us find patterns within it so that we can think about experiences being more emergent because of the continuity of how we're seeing all this data come together. So data about the world and data about the individual, when supported by AI, when AI is used to streamline it, can lead to more of emergent experience. And so there's like a new category of experiences, right? We're moving from linear experiences, film and TV, to nonlinear experiences with gaming, with themed entertainment. Now, emergent experience is everything is kind of up for grabs, right? The world is responding to you. The world itself is also changing. So the context is changing. All of these things are kind of co-evolving so that you have a unique moment and unique experiences every time that you're interacting. All of these things, as again Kathleen mentioned, they don't just exist, in specific contexts. Now they're really helping us design across the board. They're helping us think about not just narrative experiences, but our day-to-day lives of, I want to get from point A to point B. I know that it's going to take me 15 minutes to do so, but I have 45 minutes before my appointment. What can I do along the way that's maybe relevant to me? What is, my friends are hanging out in this coffee shop along the way. Can I drop in and say hi? Flowers are blooming along the route. So if I walk instead of taking a drive, maybe I can get to appreciate them, right? So that's a very functional thing that's amplifying our day-to-day experience that now, because of this context that we're living in, is kind of negotiating this bleed from like things that feel like solely play experiences to now bringing play into our day-to-day functional experiences. So the really exciting thing is now that's kind of this context that we're living in, where it's taking a thing that feels very very out of our grasp. It's this data, but now it's in our hands, and now it becomes a tool for us as designers. And that's what I'm really excited about. I'm excited to kind of dig more into what that looks like.
Great, thank you, Rachel. Data is everywhere, not just ones and zeros anymore.
100%.
All right, so we'll move on to Lisa for a few minutes. So Lisa, your background is in communications and connecting with people and using technology to do that. So do you want to give us some of your thoughts about immersive storytelling through different mediums and what the Immersiverse is for you?
Yeah, so hi everybody, and thanks for having me. I'm going to be coming at it more from the marketplace standpoint, like Kathleen was talking about, and sort of the nuts and bolts of what storytelling is to me from a marketing and communications, but also business development and from my own experience. And God, mind blown, you guys. The whole thing of the blending of realities, we're seeing it. I mean, they've been predicting it for a long time with kitchens and smart homes and, all that kind of thing, but it's everywhere now. Anyway, I'm going to share my screen. All right. Nope, I did not share yet. There we go. Okay. So you may know me from my time at Hypervision. I know that Darren, it was probably in my own intro, an accident because I have a marketing background. I was never the marketing director at JRA, which is now part of RWS Global. I was the business development or strategic account director at Hypervision. Hypervision told stories on, like, we received data from our clients, and then from there we would use our solutions to help them tell a story. And that was our version of storytelling. Since then, I have moved on. I am now the director of business development over at JRA, part of RWS Global. I have to say that every time. I'm just kidding. But we are in the whole vein of imagining worlds. That's what we do. We want to take those imaginary worlds and make things like they're real. And we're the creators of extraordinary destinations. But basically, in a nutshell, we do concept design, master planning, pop-up experiences, traveling exhibits, museums, you name it. And one of the things that I found from JRA is they came up with this list of 10 attributes of successful attractions. Feel free to screenshot, snapshot, whatever. But the thing I want to focus on is that if you notice, number 2 here, story driven. It's like the most important part underneath coming up with an idea that's innovative. The story is very, very important at JRA. And this just gives you some examples of the things that we have been very fortunate to participate in. But moving on, I was able to get this amazing quote from our director of design, Tony Schmidt. Harnessing a powerful story is the heartbeat of immersive sensory experiences. Story transforms attractions into immersive odysseys where every visitor embarks on a deeply personal journey, forging emotional connections, excitement, nostalgia, joy, fear that resonate long after the adventure concludes. I mean, that's what it's all about, right? So, in my own opinion, effective storytelling always starts with why. And this is coming from my marketing and my business development, but I think it's very effective. If you don't know your why, how do you maintain your story or your message from that marketing and business development standpoint? You might change the story throughout all the various platforms, but you always want the same message. And so you need to know why is this our story? What is going on here? How do the characters do what they do? What do they do? You know, what's the plot? All of those different things, but you have to have that really solid before you can really come up with an effective story, in my opinion. And one of the great examples that I have found out there of good storytelling across all the different realities is the Harry Potter franchise. I mean, if you think about it, they started with the books, they went on to the movies, then the theme parks, and then this. I had a great discussion with Michael Libby about this. This is a great example, the wand activation of staying in the story, even though interactivity is involved, which a lot of times, if you're interacting with something, it can take you away from the story because they haven't figured out how to make those two worlds meld, right? And this is a great example of a different story, because what you're doing is you're using your wand to become a better wizard. That's the story, but it's the same message. It's that Harry Potter, it's the wizarding world, you're becoming a wizard, and it's brilliant. And then on to websites. I mean, we've got the Harry Potter at Home hub. And we've got Harry Potter in VR. I mean, it's just everywhere. I could go on, and you could probably name hundreds of more examples, but something that, you know, is coming and we've already experienced is AI. And these were two simple prompts that I did in Midjourney to create a Harry Potter-ish experience. That's my own version of fan fiction. So, you know, it happens. And as Harry Potter would do, they're going to disappear. So where do we go from here and what's next? AI. Now, from a business development and marketing perspective, that's really the best way I can tell you, you know, is how you would attach it and how you would use AI for your business is how do you want to be perceived by your customers? So in that sense, there's like 4 key factors and probably more to consider. How and when do you want to implement AI? When not to use AI. That's very important if you think about the actors' strike, the writers' strike, and all the different things that are going on. You really need to be cognizant and come up with some best practices for yourself and your business. Which AI model is best for you, for your message, your needs, whatever, whether it's text, graphic, that sort of thing. And what type of AI do you need for your project? I will share a link in the chat that has different types of AI. It lists them and great examples of them in the marketplace. And that's it. That's all I got for you.
Thank you very much, Lisa.
Thank
All right.
you.
So
Let me
as
stop sharing.
Lisa
Give me a
mentioned,
second.
so sure. As Lisa mentioned, moving along, we'll have a little bit more open discussion of a few different topics. So as we go along, please add questions to the chat. I'll pick them up and we can pose them to our panelists as we go. So a jumping off point for this is start the discussion, starting with one possible vision of what a future might look like. So we're actually going to use a little video clip. Some of you may have seen it. It's been around for a while, called Hyper Reality by 𝐭𝐡𝐚𝐥. So I'll play a little bit of that. We'll have sort of a gentle introduction at first, and then perhaps a more overwhelming version as we go along. Let me just share.
Ay, no, cállate. ¿Qué está pasando?
We're seeing their one version of different ways to interact with the environment around you, and then an even more intense, overwhelming experience.
Estoy libre de mi ira. Estoy libre de mi tristeza. El amor espiritual.
Adiós.
Olá, eu sou Maria.
Right. There's a lot going on there.
Yeah.
So, so you can see with what's going on in there, there's a lot of focus on, maybe direct marketing, things like that with your options. But there's certainly all kinds of interactivity that you could use to potentially tell stories day to day in real life. So, Kathleen, is storytelling, can it be part of our reality every day?
Yeah, I'm going to be short about this because Rachel, I want to hear your perspective because we talked in Rift about this. But the one thing I see in that, and while it's already like 8 years old, it's relevant because I always say this, coming from gaming and coming from a rewards-based system, trying to level people up and engage them, whether it's presence management in marketing or whether in games you're trying to reward people, that's not the reality that I want to live in when I'm in a blended reality. I don't, certainly I can opt out of it, but this is a big argument for architects, and we can talk about themed entertainment, folks as well, and experience design, how you're designing emotion. And what's that feel like? That's a world I definitely don't want to live in. So I have used that just to say, please, if we go here, I don't want to do business with you, but we can stop it now. And I'm going to throw this over to Rachel on the tools side of that conversation.
Yeah, because I think we talked about the fact this is a video from 8 years ago. So it's already, it's an older vision of the future. It's thankfully not where we're at yet, right? The technology isn't quite developed. There isn't as much adoption yet of headsets to the extent that we're going to be surrounded by this. But we're potentially getting there, right? So this gives us time to think in a very intentional way about what should these worlds look like? What do we want them to look like? How can we be intentional in the design of these things so that if we're just designing technology with we can do this, it's different from thinking through the implications, right? We're living already in the last 20 years across an ever expanding number of layers of reality. Each of these layers of reality is very different in the way that they think about what the self means. Is it our physical body? Is it our an aspect of our personality, right? Our self is changing. The way we relate to space is changing, and thus the way we relate to each other is changing, right? And we're constantly negotiating between and jumping between all of these different layers of this is me on social media, this is me on FaceTime, this is me in physical reality, this is me in virtual space. And it's overwhelming already and promises to be even more so. So I think it comes back to, we have to design very intentionally for the tools of how do we have control, which systems are conscious control and let us have agency over how our data is used and what is presented to us, which systems are maybe pushed to the background for more subconscious control, so that it's like, no, I don't actually want to see all these types of advertisements, and they're going to be screened out before I even would see them in front of my face, right? And I think that comes down to, again, over the next 10 years, us as creators, us as designers who know what a good experience means, to be part of those conversations.
I want to riff on that and say one thing. The one thing that theme park experience designers do well is understand sanctuary space. Gamers understand a reward space. And in that, you know, what can we count on AI for, which is mirroring ourselves. So, you know, all of these values in all these different verticals are important to bring to the table.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
I agree.
Yeah, it's very true. Yeah, we've talked about intentional design and tools. Being an engineer, when I think about using tools and applying technology, I ask myself what standards apply. You know, there's always something, best practices, codes to follow, things like that. Kathleen, can you tell us a little bit about what's going on in the world in terms of standards and best practices?
I mean, thank goodness for Europe. We follow them, and then, you know, we pull that in as our own. I know we're, can I say this? We're ex-colonists. Am I allowed to say that? Right? So, you know, come by this naturally, I guess. Anyway, I am grateful that in one sense, you know, this is a tricky discussion being an artist first when it comes to censorship and it comes to standards. So in one sense, you've got Musk saying, please don't put emotions into AI. It just needs to be transactional, except we're in a world of everything getting mirrored to ourselves. So in one sense, I do want the standards, the Metaverse Standards Forum, the AI standards that are coming our way, everything that we're sort of holding on to right now. We have to sort of wring it out and see how this feels. Everybody's jockeying for their own, you know, ROI and their own competitive edge. And I just so want to ditch the word competitive edge. Everybody should be, we're in a decentralized moment of everybody sharing and everything open. And while Hollywood doesn't lean that way and IP doesn't lean that way, we're in a really new moment of defining standards. So I'm not going to lean and say I have an opinion other than I'm welcoming the corralling of the Wild West, but I loved the ancient city marketplace of the web before it became a new distribution platform. So I'm my own oxymoron, basically.
Thanks. Anybody else have any thoughts on the topic?
Yeah, I mean, I think it comes back to that like intentional design piece, right? Of when we have standards, we're able to make sure that we're protecting people within these contexts, and the tech industry has a tendency to rush into things and not think about those intended or unintended consequences. I think that's one of the reasons why, like when we're talking about AI, for instance, I think it's so important to have at least some understanding of like, what do we want to advocate for in that context, right? AI is such a broad thing. It's so many aspects of what is under AI, and which things do we want to advocate for, right? Like, should we be having emotion in AI? Should we not? I think it helps to kind of understand the context of like AI itself has evolved so much in the last couple of years, but it's drawing on this history of when we started experimenting with AI in the 50s and 60s. It was very top-down, rules-based kind of AI where we had a lot more control. And there was a lack of scale in how that operated, because we would have had to train and you code everything into the system specifically. And then in the 80s or 90s, there was this change towards, let's have self-training systems. Let's throw all the data in and let AI kind of find its own patterns. And we're seeing kind of the fruition of that with the generative models, ChatGPT, Midjourney, all of those things are kind of a growth out of that decision to move towards that. But it does make us think in terms of standards. if we're working with self-trained systems, how are we making sure that there's control? How are we making sure there's intentionality and that these systems are learning in the way that we want them to, and not just picking up the worst patterns of our own behavior? So I think it comes back to, intentional design, those standards helping us maybe parse the difference between here's where we should have regulation so that we have more control at the end of the day.
Well, and I think it's so important. I mean, this whole discussion, we're talking about, and I love that, Kathleen, you said what did you say? You're an oxymoron or something like that. I mean, the truth is artists don't want to be replaced. Writers don't want to be replaced. All these different things. You can make as many regulations as you want. There's still going to be some disruption, huge disruption in the marketplace and in terms of who has the same job 10 years from now. It's going to be very different. And so having those regulations is great. We need to probably, and we need to protect individual rights and things like that. But there's only so much you can do, in my opinion.
Yeah. So on that topic, that we're talking about the challenges of incorporating AI into, daily operations and things like that. Is there anything else you're thinking of that people or organizations need to be cautious of as they're incorporating AI into their workflow?
Well, for JRA, we implement AI only for very early blue sky ideation, discussions, sparking ideas, things like Midjourney, whatever, and possibly very early client presentations just to see if that's sort of what they're thinking. But then immediately we turn it over to the designers to come up with their own concepts and things like that. And we never use AI to circumvent the actual writers or artists, designers, people like that. That's sort of our standards and practices. That's all I can speak to.
Weigh in on that because it points to quality. Because like the strike, the SAG strike, I was talking to a writer at a meetup, and basically it was like, hey, look, writer, there's 6 episodes of data that we've unfolded that doesn't exist, of women, female truckers in their 40s. And I've used this example before. So go write 6 episodes. Oh, you know what? Now you don't have to because an AI is going to write it. And the mass population isn't going to care about the quality. They just want to be seen. And so it really points to, if JRA isn't going to do that and hold on to quality, at what point is the tipping point that quality then goes out the door because you're now seen in your vertical as a data point?
Mm-hmm. True.
I think it's always very cyclical, right? We saw this in different ways with content and entertainment, right? People see that there's an interest in something. Companies are like, let's just get into that area. Let's do as much as possible to build an audience there. And it's okay if it's not great content. We want to rush into the space. And they do that, and then they realize that they lose something in that process, right? They lose the brand recognition of we are people who create high quality content. People know that they can come here for quality content. And if they want something after they get a little bit overwhelmed by just having kind of content that doesn't feel meaningful, they don't know where to turn to now because we don't no longer stand for quality content. So I think there have been a lot of times in the industry where there have been kind of these waves. I think we're going to see companies incorporating AI. Some companies might overdo it and be like, yeah, let's develop AI that pushes a button and makes a movie. Yeah, maybe you could do that, but is it going to be a good movie, right? I think we're going to see maybe a push towards that in some way, and then see that maybe the pullback of hopefully people like recognizing that they want kind of things where AI is a tool, but also the creator and the human kind of comes alongside and brings their ingenuity and inventiveness to it to make it a cohesive and satisfactory experience.
Yeah, that's good discussion. So I'm just conscious of the time and making sure we keep things moving along here. So just a final kind of topic to think about. So Lisa, think about applying all these tools and technologies What's the current thinking related to sort of business models? How are we preparing people for the incorporation of these developments? It's also relevant to have a chat about, where can we draw from gaming or architecture and themed entertainment metaverse applications. I guess it's really an open question for anybody who wants to chime in, but what do we think about all
those? That's a big question. I mean, I think pretty much the stuff that I was talking about with JRA, that's in terms of business model, that's the gold standard. You have you're reputable, right? You have a good reputation for where our designers are creating the content, our people, we have quality, just like we were just discussing. I think that, in my mind, is the strong business model. But again, like Rachel was saying, it's cyclical. At some point, people are going to be, there's this level, and you can get really good stuff over here in the AI world. And you can, it's great. Or you can take the AI stuff and doctor it up and make it look great. I mean, there's so much going on there that the business model for that is going to be formed by each, there's going to be this disruption of people and companies making the decisions and then setting standards, in my opinion.
I think I think it's also going to be about, like, there are obviously so many types of AI, right? There's generative AI, which I think that's one where we should have more caution because it's one that we have less control over. But machine learning, procedural AI systems for like creating procedural assets, right? We've been incorporating those things for a good amount of time now. The challenge is going to be, I think, at an organizational level, how much are we willing to learn from each other and work cross-departmentally? Because those types of things can really bring about efficiencies in production, but it comes from different departments collaborating with each other. Or we can learn a lot of how to use these tools in these systems because gaming has been using some of these tools, or architecture has been using some of these tools, but it comes down to how much are we willing to be cross-industry and how we learn and adopt. And I think, Kathleen, you have some thoughts on that as well.
The only thing I was going to add is, we're so up against time and budget. And having managed big budgets, it's pull back on scope. If you're a good producer, you pull back in scope and you add in 20% at the end of the day for all the variables unknown, and you hope you hit your target on time under budget. In this case, pulling back on scope, AI might be able to help. And so it really is doing an exploration on a small scale on how AI can help if you have to pull back on scope, as well as take you down a rabbit hole if you're investing in a proprietary AI. So it's unique to what company, and it's unique to where the company is in their business. At least that's me with clients. So I want to give time for questions. It's 4:53 too.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah.
I was just going to head there next as well. I've gathered a couple, but just maybe wanted to go quickly around just for the lightning round. So in 30 seconds or less, before we go into the questions, for each of you, where do you think we're headed next with the metaverse and spatial computing design? And any kind of final thoughts based on what we've talked about, and we'll go into the questions. Kathleen, you're nodding your head and waving your hand. You're ready to go, or you're saying no thanks?
What can I pull up to show? It's all just so wacky. We're in the wackiest moment ever. I'm so grateful to be here. I'm not jaded after 30 years, and really, speech to scenes of my life is a game changer for me. So while that might be X amount of years off, that's what I designed for in my head.
That's crazy. Rapid fire for me, I think we're going to see stuff like in the distant future, not too distant future, things like what we're seeing in the Apple Vision Pro, other places. Without the Apple, obviously, just like the iPhone was copied, we're going to see it everywhere.
I think the thing that gets me excited is continuity of experience. Something that starts in your kitchen continues when you're at work, continues when you jump on your headset or when you're visiting friends. I think that's always been the dream, but now we actually are having tools and the ability to really get us closer to that reality.
Great. All right, let's jump into a couple of questions as we're getting close to the end. So I've picked a couple of, there's been a few in the chat. So starting with one from Adrian Barrett. With AI, How are you finding the management of the data sets behind the technology? Are you seeing more licensing or clients investing into the building of their own? Anybody have any thoughts on that?
1 second. I worked with a client for 3 years who got taken to the mat in creating a proprietary AI, all for it to be dysfunctional by the time we had OpenAI. So it's a tricky one. You know, if you're going proprietary, who's the company that's funding it? What's the research behind it? Who's investing in it versus this being, you know, some kind of one-off project for a client. I've just seen both sides of proprietary and not proprietary and seen benefits of both. So
yeah, and I think if the company is big enough, it does become helpful just for legal reasons of knowing that they know what went into that data set. And also just making sure that when, you know, it's the whole, like, if you're not paying for the thing, you're the product. If you're feeding into the system, you're helping make the system more intelligent, but that means all that data is now public in some way. So I think for safety reasons, some companies are willing to, you know, take the step of making their own models.
And also our engineer, when he left, so did the whole AI. So just saying, as another example, meaning his mindset, it was his mind that created this AI. And so we were sort of left with, oh my God, we got to get to, you know, underneath this guy's brain. So there's that.
All right. So next,
Sure.
Jules has posted, and I think it's very valid. How should we create or incorporate AI that is able to address an increasing level of stress, depression, and anxiety, especially amongst the younger generation? Any advice? As a parent of teenagers, I appreciate that question.
Well, I think AI is being used in apps and things like that right now to help people. I mean, if I, for one, limit my time on Instagram using their AI that tells me, you know, maybe you should spend less time here or whatever. I forget how it came up, but I opted in. I don't know. That's a good question for the data person.
I think some of it is kind of going against what the impulse of what AI does for us, right? Like you mentioned AI and algorithms. AI and algorithms is designed to give us what we want to see, but in doing so, it makes our world smaller, right? Because it keeps showing us more of what we already care about. And some of what we lose is the serendipity of seeing things that are outside of our experience when we're in this bubble. So I think AI that helps us push against that is one, right? That kind of slowly expands our world by not showing us what we want to see at a given moment. And I think also AI that helps us be more embodied. I think that's something that we lose. We forget how much of our intelligence comes from interacting with others, from being a part of the environment, and, you know, touching grass literally. What are things that manufacture, like, give us incentives maybe to push us out into the real world, but it can be so comforting to just keep seeing content that's related to what we care about.
If I had an AI and I could say to it, in 20 years, just like the like button, and there's a whole society of depressed teenagers because of the like button, this AI, I want to be able to ask it to say, give me an answer right now, or give me and reflect back to me what 20 years ahead would be, knowing that this is a problem. So I'm hoping that data sets increase enough to be able to answer that. And also provenance, the authenticity behind anything, to me, and the person to person is going to be the currency. You know, real life experience is going to be the currency that might be the thing to combat it. I don't know, but there's that, which is a big variable.
Yeah, I don't know. As both of you were speaking, I don't know that AI can fix it. People's depression and things like that. You know, that's a tough one. Like I said, there's apps out there to help you calm down and help you, you know, meditate and things like that. But I don't know. I mean, you know, I'm sure somebody's working on some kind of a parental AI sort of situation where it can curtail how much their kids are doing certain types of things on their phones or whatever. But that's a tough one. I think, like
But also AI can help if you're somebody who doesn't engage, and you can engage in a virtual environment because it's safer. Then we get to, words like what's safety, what's authenticity, what's real, what's not. And so
True.
The EI side of this is so important.
Yeah. So I mean, yeah, there maybe enhanced tools, but still it's an individual thing that has to be worked on by people and families and others. So just maybe one more quick question related to job titles and career search, that type of thing, and then we'll wrap up. So from Kendra, hi, I'm a narrative designer with master's degree in human-computer interaction and user experience, seeking a role in XR theming, narrative building, worlds, etc. What career titles should I be looking for? Is there anything that you've seen out there that's, I'm sure there's a whole bunch of different titles.
Yeah, there are so many. I mean, I've seen I think Michael Libby even said this on there, creative technologist. I've seen that just recently. So that's just one of many. I think you just have to be on the lookout for, especially on LinkedIn, it'll, you start looking for jobs that relate to that, but it's still changing and things are changing. But Kathleen's title's great.
Tech humanist?
Yeah.
I will answer that question by saying I worked on the capstone project for the University of Idaho in Moscow, and their capstone project was name your title. These are graduate students. Name your title of your career in the next 25 years. So it was fascinating because it's already changing. Things like reality designer and producer, an AR manager for individualized education, AI manager for global education, virtual therapeutic environment designer. I mean, the list goes on. I'm happy to share it, but it was fascinating to ask students that are just coming out of university what they think their title is going to be. And then if you, of course, want the job, yes, creative technologist. But I will tell you this, it means something different to every company. So it's really what the company and where the company's values are, because a UX designer typically has in the past had very difficult time immersing themselves into, this kind of world. Whereas interaction designers, which are gamers, might not understand in real life theme park, experience design. It really depends on the company. And, I have a slide where producer, project manager, program manager, production manager, I go down the whole list, and every company you could swap that role out in every.
Definitely.
You're on mute,
right.
Rachel.
Sorry. Quick thing is, don't tie yourself to the title, because depending on which industry you're coming from, it's both, each of them are coming at a different angle. Also, it's changing quickly. Be flexible. That's the biggest thing.
Great. All right, I think that's a good place to wrap up. And also thanks to Michael Libby for throwing an answer in the chat. You're on the panel, even if you're not on the panel.
Yeah, so. Man.
Hey, Michael Libby. OG.
All right, so we'll wrap it up there. Thanks to everybody for joining us today. Thanks through our audio difficulties at the beginning. Thanks to Kathleen, Rachel, and Lisa for sharing your knowledge and information with us today. So for everybody out there, please look for future TEA online events as they're shared through social media, through 𝐒𝐸𝐞𝐜𝐢𝐚. That's our website. And look forward to seeing you next time around. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, Darren.
Bye. Thanks, everyone.
Lisa. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Kathleen and Rachel and Darren.
Thanks, all. Bye.